Greetings, I'm Steve Vancore, and this is the Florida Public Powercast, a production of the Florida Municipal Electric Association. And this episode is brought to you by Burns and McDonnell. Thank you, Burns and McDonnell, for sponsoring this. We really appreciate it. Each episode, we sit down with leaders and experts from Florida's public power communities to explore the issues, innovations, and people shaping our state's energy future. Let's get started. Greetings, I'm Steve Vancore, and this is the Florida Public Powercast, a production of the Florida Municipal Electric Association. Each episode, we sit down with leaders and experts from Florida's public power communities to explore the issues, innovations, and people shaping our state's energy future. Now, our guest today is the city manager of Winter Park, Florida, which you guys who don't know where Winter Park is, it's just outside of Orlando. Beautiful little downtown, great little community, fantastically developed lakes. I love the place. It's a kind of a really neat bedroom community to Orlando. Randy Knight, thank you so much for being on with us.
Thank you for having me.
This is a repeat for you and I, but not on the FMEA podcast. So what we want to talk about is Winter Park. I don't know the answer to this. How many? You guys have one now. It's like exactly 20 years old, right?
That's right. June 1st was 20 years.
What's the most, do you know off the top of your head, what's the most recent municipal electric authority to come online?
I think it's us still.
Yeah, I thought so. Which 20 years, you would think others would have seen the success you guys are having. And you've been there. You became city manager shortly after the municipal electric was on. You were the assistant right before. So what led to the city saying, gosh darn it, we need to have our own municipal utility? What was that thought process that said we just need to pull the plug and do this thing?
Yeah, it was quite interesting. As we were getting near the year 2000, we were in 2000, and our franchise with what at the time was Florida Power Corp was getting set to expire in January of 2001. And within that franchise, we had the right to purchase at the end of the term. So it was one of those things where I will admit staff was assuming we would renegotiate a new franchise with Florida Power Corp and keep going. We had a couple of commissioners that had other thoughts on that at the time. And, the primary reason being reliability was a disaster in Winter Park. It was just kind of legendary, the outages that we would have. And we sit here right next door to OUC, who had the tagline, the reliable one, but it wasn't just a tagline. They were the reliable one. And so all these chief executives that live in Winter Park and work in downtown Orlando, they saw the difference every day in the reliability. And so there was a lot of talk about why can't we be more like OUC and have reliable power in Winter Park? And I don't want to put all the blame
hold on. I find that an interesting dynamic because a lot of people who work for the city of Orlando and a lot of executives who have offices in downtown Orlando love the beauty, and it's not too far of a commute to Winter Park, and they're like, hey, right across the border here, these guys have it going on. I come home to brownouts on a regular basis. Does that kind of sum it up really well?
Yeah, 100%. In fact, we would have people who during the campaign, we'll talk about later, but who claimed that they had extension cords that they would run across the street to their neighbors that had OUC on the other side of the street. So when they lost their power in Winter Park, they would plug into the OUC guy across the street.
I like that. This could be the campaign slogan: "No more cords."
That's right.
Let's keep the lights on for a change. So it was the concerns over service, concerns over outages, and then the proximity to a regional provider who was a municipal-owned utility, right?
Right, a very successful one.
And so you can see that right there, and literally within the shadow of your own neighborhood.
Right, and then the other part, I know you're from Tallahassee. Like Tallahassee, Winter Park is a very tree-lined city. beautiful, magnificent oak trees on every street. And, when Florida Power Corp would try to improve the reliability and come in and they do these giant V cuts in the tree so that the
People
trees don't hit
love
the
the V
power
cuts.
lines.
They love them.
Yeah. People would lose their minds, when they would try to get enough clearance to make the system more reliable. And so in some ways we are our own worst enemy because we would complain if they butchered the trees and we'd complain if the power went out.
Absolutely.
And so, it was tough on them. We would always argue that if you put the power lines underground, won't have that problem. And they would say, well, that's too expensive. We can't do that. And so as we were approaching the end of our franchise, the Florida Power Corp came and asked us to extend the franchise. They had 106 franchises in the state of Florida, and most of them they were just going through and renewing them in most cities. And then there were probably about 10 cities that were balking, saying, "No, maybe we need to look at this." And Winter Park ended up being one of those that said, "No, I think it's time we take a look at this." One of the things they were doing in the renewals is they refused to put that clause in the new franchises that gave the city the right to purchase at the end of the franchise.
Oh,
And so with that refusal, our commissioners, a couple of our commissioners were saying, well, then it's a permanent franchise. If we never have the right to purchase, it's not really a 30-year renewal. It's a permanent
it's an
renewal.
infinite renewal.
Yeah,
One of the things I love about this story, we're having a lot of conversations about the role of local government coming from the state legislature. And the idea that a local community would say, we want to take control of stuff, which is what we want: our own fire department, we want our own police department, and we're willing to pay for it. And we have elections and cover the costs of doing so because we like good service. And I think Winter Park is a really good example. We want better service and we're willing to pay for it. Which leads me to my second question. The going to the ballot, you had to go to the ballot because in order to purchase this, you had to borrow money. How did that process unfold?
you're exactly right. Our charter requires us, if we're purchasing real estate, we can only do that if we're issuing debt, we have to get voter approval. And part of buying the electric utility is buying the poles and wires and the substations, and there was land involved. So that triggered us having to go to the voters. Uh, Something that big we probably would have anyway, but we had to by charter. And so,
And by the way, I like that idea that you would have gone anyway for the simple reason you want to get public buy-in to something like this. Because when you take on a big, giant, or as Jeb Bush used to say, a big, hairy, audacious goal, things are going to go wrong. There's going to be hiccups. There's going to be problems. There's going to be issues. And if you have public buy-in, I think there'll be more understanding in the long run for some of these issues, right? Hey, look, if 70% vote for something and we're going to give it a try, we have full expectations, guys, things could fall, wheels could fall off, and we'll fix those things, but it's now up to us. We can't blame the other guy.
right. And it's kind of important to take a step back here. From the time the commission decided to move forward, that was in early 2001, move forward with studying the issue, doing a
Yeah,
feasibility study.
when was the franchise going to expire?
January of 2001.
But you didn't kick off your utility till 2026.
Right. So,
You had the Articles of Confederation?
2005, yeah. And so it took, first it took almost 3 years to get to the referendum. We started with a bunch of, first thing they did was sue us. Florida Power Corp sued us to claim that the right to purchase we had in the contract was not valid, that we really didn't have a right to purchase. And their legal argument was that back when we entered into that franchise in 1971, franchises were required by state statute to have a right to purchase in them. And somewhere in that 30 years that transpired, that statute was repealed or modified to where it was no longer a requirement. So their argument was when the state did away with that requirement that they be in there, that also did away with the clause that was in our existing contract. Well, that went all the way to the Florida Supreme Court, and we won. And they said, no, a right to purchase is a right to purchase, and it means what it says. And so we spent,
It's a lot like saying, when I was a kid, drinking age was 18. They moved it to 21, like right when I turned 20, and I was really happy about that. And that's like saying, well, you were drinking before, that's illegal. You're like, no, this was the law
yeah,
then, and I followed the law. So I'm glad the
right,
Supreme Court sided with you guys on that.
yeah.
But
And
what
then the
did you do in
second
the
thing they
intervening
did,
period? Because if the franchise expires and you're not yet purchased it, did you get like short-term lease extensions?
yeah. So the way it was worded in the clause, it said at and after the end of the franchise, we have the right to purchase. But your question is spot on because they then immediately quit remitting the franchise fee. They were collecting a 6% franchise fee on our behalf, and they said, "Well, your franchise expired. We don't have to pay you that anymore." And that was a big part of our budget. I mean, it was a huge component of our general fund budget is this 6% franchise fee coming in. And so we filed a deck action saying, oh no, they're still serving. They have to still pay the fee. And it's a pass through to the customer anyway. So it's not like they are paying it. It's a 6% adder to your bill. But they were trying to put financial pressure on us to
Sure.
cave. And and so we made the argument that, they were still in our rights of way and that they still owed the community the money for being serving in those city right of way. And again, the court agreed with us and forced them to pay and remit the funds. We went without it for maybe 7 or 8 months, but then they had to pay it retroactively, so we won that as well. Uh, and then there was a little bit of a fight over how we were going to determine the value of the system once we clearly had the right to purchase. When we had to go through all the how we're going to do it, and they chose to go through arbitration and pick 3 arbitrators and do a valuation case before the arbitrators to determine the ultimate value of the system. They had a feasibility study that said the system was worth 106 million. We had one that said it was worth about 16 million. And so we had a little bit
Oh
of a
my God,
difference
that's quite
there.
the disparity.
And ultimately the arbitrator settled at about $42.5 million as the value of the system. So we went back and did another feasibility study and said, it's 3 times more than we thought we were going to pay for it. Does it still work? And that study came back and said, yeah, it still works at 42.5 million. And so that's when we started the process. And I think one of the smartest things our commission did, and they did a lot of smart things, uh, which is hard to get people to say about elected officials, but they really did. Uh, they said this was in May of 2003, and they said, "What is the earliest we can schedule the referendum? Because we don't want to give them a year to continue to outspend us on the campaign and to try to overturn another election."
Yeah, because
And
your
so,
hands are partially tied too, because you back then you could educate, but you couldn't advocate. They could spend all the money they want to say vote no. You cannot spend a nickel to say vote yes.
right, at least in those days, you could still put out factual information
Exactly.
as a
You
city. Today,
can
you can't
educate,
even
you
do
can't
that.
advocate, right?
But so we had a
Those are
political action
the days
committee.
when everything was still in black and white, Randy.
That's right. Uh, there was a political action committee formed on our side called Winter Park Power Options, and they raised about $50,000 to campaign and advocate for the purchase. The city itself spent probably another 30,000 or so putting out factual information,
Hmm.
just the facts, not advocating per se. And they spent well over 500,000 in what they had to report on their political action committee to fight against us. And not only that, they were running prime time, the feel good ads, Florida Power Corp is here for you, type of ads on, college game
Hmm.
day Saturdays. And, so they were spending, they probably spent another 500,000 just with
So
their normal
let's
feel
work this
good ad.
backwards. Punchline for anybody listening is you got 70% of the vote saying yes, move forward. How did you? What were some of the key messages that helped get there? Because that's not just a landslide; that's a really big landslide.
Yeah, there were a few things. One is uh, they I think our community could see that we were being bullied and threatened. And again, we've got a very educated community, a lot of chief executive officers that don't like to be bullied. And so I think that helped. You know, the fact that OUC was next door carried a lot of weight because they're out there going, cities can't do this. Cities are, they're not very good at this. They don't know what they're doing. And OUC's over there just knocking it out of the park every day. And so that was huge. And Winter Park had and has a reputation of delivering very good service. Our water and sewer system is top notch. Our police and fires top notch. And so they would say we don't know what we're doing, and we'd say, yes, we have not run an electric utility, but I'll hire people that have run one and have managed them. And this is not rocket science. We already have a billing system. We already have all that in place. And so we can do this. And the people believed in Winter Park.
You know what I love about that, Randy? A lot of times people will say, well, if you're a city, you're a monopoly and people have to have your services. So why bother with effective branding? Why bother with nonstop communication? Why bother with all that stuff? And I think this highlights a really good example when you provide good service and you let them know you're providing good service, because that's critical. Because let's face it, I go on a road and I'm intimate. I represent the Florida City Managers Association, as you know, the League of Cities, been in and around local government a long time. Honest to God, I think I know most roads in my community, who controls which road. But if my city isn't telling me we did this good stuff, my county tells me you need to do that, folks, because when you come up with situations like this, I think what you're saying is, for starters, there was an element of trust in our local government, in our local city. You mentioned very smart commissioners, and that travels with that, right? So when they say we need to make a tough decision, like we got to go out and borrow $42 million or whatever it was, they're like, okay, we trust you guys. And that's why effective branding, nonstop effective communication, professional communication. I'm not talking about selfies and stuff like that. I'm talking about letting them know, communicating through all the channels, because you can no longer just communicate on one or two. That leads to a really strong base for which to communicate. And Randy, I've done a lot of political campaigns, and there's just not a word you can say to change people's minds. And if on a regular basis I'm flipping on my lights and they don't come on, I don't care what kind of piece of direct mail, I don't care what kind of feel-good ad I get, I'm mad at that provider.
That's a very good point. And one of our most effective campaign pieces, both on on the PAC's website and as a mailer, was the flashing clock with the number 12 o'clock on it flashing, because people were used to coming home and seeing their clock flashing 12. And it's because the power went off sometime during the day. And that resonated with people. Now, these days that doesn't happen as much, but
You get the little itty bitty backup battery helps. We all have our
yeah. But
smartphones
20
and
years
everything's
ago,
got
that
an
was
app, so yeah. Okay, so you get this. You're there. You're dealing with, obviously, trade winds blowing in your direction. You get 70%. What? Okay, so now you're like, okay, we caught the car on election
right.
night. You guys are like pretty happy. You're like, okay. Oh, by the way, Randy, you're about to be installed as the new city manager. So somebody else caught the car and they're handing it over to you. What was in your mind? What was going to be some early benchmarks of success in doing that?
Well, we made some promises during the campaign that, that now all of a sudden, okay, now how do we keep these promises? One is we promised we would not charge higher rates than Progress Energy was, or, they had changed to Progress Energy, but this time it was no longer Florida Power Corp. And we're not going to charge higher rates. We're going to mirror their rates. And we mirrored their rates for 5 years. And there was a lot more early startup costs than we anticipated. So mirroring their rates and trying to cover those costs was tough in those early years. And we lost money in the first couple of
What are some of
years.
the things that were unexpected in terms of costs?
Yeah, so the separation and reintegration work, which is, when you picture yourself as being surrounded by the utility you bought out, you got to cut the wire everywhere it crosses the city limit line, right? And reconfigure their side so it stays on their side, and reconfigure our side so it's all contained. And we were served by like five substations, and now we're going to be served by just the two we own within the city limits. And so there was all of that cost. And then that first summer was a hot one. And there was this date, I think it was August 27th, 2005, where we had just came off the 2004 hurricanes. There had been a lot of crews from all over the country in here repairing the Progress Energy lines. And we had lines where splices were done that literally melted in the air because they were carrying so much juice through them because the way we configured the system to start with.
Wow.
And so we had overloaded circuits coming out of one of the substations. And so we had to immediately put some express new feeders in, which is, not easy work or cheap work. And so we had to do stuff like that that wasn't really in our budget, but you had to do it. And so
I'm not an electrician, but you can't have stuff melting in the middle of the day.
no, that's bad. And
You're
so
right there. That's why this podcast is so important. So people listening to this will learn stuff. If your
yeah.
stuff is melting, that's bad. Thank you, Randy. I appreciate that. I'm ready to sign off on my electrical engineering degree.
Yeah. And so it was little stuff like that, just the trying to fix. There was so much bad equipment in our system, old poles that needed to be replaced,
Oh, some things you didn't have
and
fully understand. Yeah.
and so we were spending more than we were bringing in to bring it up because we were going to deliver reliability, and so we went in the hole early, made it up later, uh, and so wasn't the it didn't feel good to have to do that, but we were going to deliver, and and we did, and so
Did the cost differential get supplemented just to regular tax dollars? Is that how that works, or you have to keep it all
uh,
self-contained?
but well, so we neg so yeah, this gets a little complicated, but yes and no. We kind of borrowed from the general fund.
I see.
We have pooled cash. We went in the hole in the electric fund, which meant really we're borrowing from the general fund that we paid back. We never used tax dollars to supplement the electric utility in the long run. They
I
get it all
see.
back.
Okay.
And so, but by 2008, we were on solid ground again,
So it took you
and
about 2 years to get your legs underneath you, and that's not bad given the enormity. I'm going to guess over 1,000 miles of wire.
yeah,
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, because that's a lot of work. I'm working with a utility in South Florida right now. They're moving their wastewater treatment plant, and that sounds cool. Move the plant from part A to part B, get it off the Indian River Lagoon, and then you got to turn the water, which was all flowing eastward through pumps and navigation and all that kind of stuff, and now you got to turn it around. And these things are all underground, and it's water flows where the gravity tells it to flow. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And those are the logistical things that probably kept you awake at night.
yeah. And it wasn't until the end of 2008 that we started undergrounding. Yeah, it's one of the things we had promised during the campaign. So that was an important milestone for us. But we did have, I don't remember the name of the hurricane. I've been here too long and there's been too many hurricanes, but we had our first hurricane after owning the system. The 2000, we got hammered in 2004 when the three hurricanes came through Winter Park. But Progress Energy was still the
Yeah.
provider. We'd already made the decision to buy it. We'd already had the vote. We were in the process, but they still owned it, and so they incurred all the costs. And there was some within the agreement. There was a true up that if they incurred certain types of costs in between the time we agreed to buy it and the time we closed, we had to pay that. So we ended up having to pay all those hurricane repair costs as part of our ultimate purchase. So that was part of that money we did not anticipate
Let
spending.
me ask you a question. So I've dealt with situations where, a trash provider knows their contract is expiring because similar circumstances. They're not doing a great job, blah, 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 blah. Costs are going up. Either there's a new franchisee, the city decides to take it over. We had a couple of those. And then service immediately begins to drop once they know. And the challenge there is say, guys, you have a statewide reputation. You don't want to have that because we're part of this network of folks. I mean, I guess it's a little different in the electric world because they get paid by the kilowatt, they get paid by the electron that gets used. So they're still getting paid. But how did you hold their feet to the fire, no pun intended, to keep them still providing at least reasonable quality of service?
Yeah, so they did. I mean, we did feel like they backed off on any type of tree trimming, and so things certainly weren't getting better while they still owned it. When we had the 2004 hurricanes, that's where we felt like we were at their mercy, because they've got, we're 1% of their overall system, and they've got people out of power all over the state of Florida. Where are they going to put their resources when they know we're leaving them? And so we did feel like we were having a hard time keeping crews in Winter Park working on Winter Park outages. And that's really where I was headed with this story because we would get a crew in here and they would fix something. They'd get this one circuit up and then they'd head out of town and we'd be begging them to come back into Winter Park. We had our first hurricane after we owned the system. We put a tree crew with our electric crew, with a police officer and the parks crew to push stuff out of the way. I mean, it was seamless. We had total control of every aspect of restoring power. And and so
And that's interesting
even
because you have, and I know municipals have the mutual aid agreements. You can bring in other people from other areas.
yep.
I guess if you're a big statewide provider, you don't think you need those. You can pull crew out of Jacksonville or out of Miami if you need to. You need to have them come in from Alabama,
Yeah,
from the
but they
sister city.
do. I mean, they bring crews in as well. It's
But their
just a
own, right?
matter of, who's directing them. And they've got somebody in their operations center telling them where to go next. And we were not high on their priority. And so once it's your own utility, we're doing the same thing. We're bringing crews in from outside, but
Right.
everything's focused on Winter Park, and we can focus on getting the hospital up first,
And
or
that's where local control so matters, right? Because if I have a hurricane and we don't get rebuilt up and running, I'm mad and I'm voting people out of office.
yeah,
If
exactly.
it's a private, I don't have they're not accountable to me. And you're right. If we're 1% of the system, they don't really care. Where I'm couch cushion change as far as they're concerned. So in 20 years is not a long time. I think you just walked through several things that took once the agreement, it took 3 or 4 years to get moving on that to go to the ballot. Then it took a 4 year, several year transition. You've only been doing this for 20 years, and yet you've gone from, oh shoot, we didn't know we didn't have those things to one of the top rated in the country. How did you get there? Other than great leadership from the city manager himself. I mean, that goes without saying. But how did your utility get there to be one of the top ranked in the country?
Yeah, it really, I give our commission a lot of credit because it's easy to see that pile of money and say, wow, we want to build this park over here. We could take 2 million out of the electric utility and build this park. They've never done that. They have let the money, the profits of the system get poured back into the system. So the undergrounding, we're at a little over 83% now undergrounded.
Well,
They're
wait,
putting,
you're at 83% undergrounded?
yes,
And that's hard because if you're, I know Winter Park is growing, but not like super fast, right? You guys are pretty built out.
yeah, we're built out. We're not
And
growing.
so I mean, we talked to several that said, yeah, well, the deal is every new development goes underground. Everybody knew it goes underground, and we're slowly transitioning. But you had mostly redos, right?
Correct. We
Is
yeah,
that the
we don't
technical
we don't
term?
have any new subdivisions,
So how did you do that so quickly? Because that's really expensive.
but it is. And so I mean, started out, we were spending about 5 million a year to underground. We're at about 10 million a year to underground now. And it's just 100% of the excess revenues goes into capital improvements, mostly undergrounding. We did do some early projects that we did for a neighborhood that wanted to be underground at first. We got them, we did a, we called it plug-in, but putting lines underground in neighborhoods is what that stood for. Where they paid some of it and we paid some of it to leverage some of those early revenues. But most of it's come, and we did do a small bond issue in 2008 to kickstart the undergrounding. But since then, it's just come totally out of the net revenues of the system, and
And so when you're
we've
done, I
not
mean,
pilfered that money for any other purpose.
yeah, if you're at 83%, 4 to 5 homes are already undergrounded, or customers, I should say. Um, so you're attributing the success to the fact that the commission kept their hands in their pockets and recognized, let's keep reinvesting in our utility, get it up to where we need it to be. And then down the road, you can use, I would guess, or do you have something else big coming on, like another power station or something?
We're actually having that conversation right now in our strategic planning because we're about 5 years away from being completely underground. And at that point, that 10 million a year we're spending on undergrounding, we have options. We can lower the rates. We can start a decorative lighting program and put decorative lights throughout the city. Uh, there is some reinvestment in some of the older
I trust also the
undergrounding.
property tax debate will have a lot to do. You might want to hold off on your strategic plan until November 8th.
Yeah, yeah, you're not wrong there. I mean, you're right. But again, that's where community control matters.
Oh, absolutely. Because if it was, a lot of municipal utilities are tempted by a big cash infusion, a franchise agreement to carry on, but then you lose that local control, you lose that local flexibility. I mean, I'm so proud of our community. We have, regularly rated best parks in America, the highest ratio canopy treed in America, largest solar field in America, for a mid-sized city. And the fact that it's our public power utility, because we're landlocked, right? We have
Right,
half the county is the Apalachicola National Forest. About, I'm going to guess, 20 to 30% of the remaining property is government owned between the two universities, a very large community college, the state courts, and all the state office buildings. My number may be high, but it's a large percentage that are utility customers that are not paying property taxes.
right.
And so taking that and maintaining that local control sounds like a really good idea, especially when you can improve service at the same time. Because the money's, and this is no slam on private utilities, the money's not going to a board of directors. It's not going to their private investors. They're going to the investors that are the community, right? The
Right.
money comes back and stays home. Anything else you would attribute the success to? Is it just about pumping the money back in?
I think that's primarily it. We do listen to the community. They've made some decisions. At some point we shifted to where we're not just undergrounding the main lines. We started undergrounding the service drops as well, as part of the system. That's kind of slowed our process a little bit, but that's what the community wanted, and so we shifted our gears and started doing that. And you know we we take pride in serving and meeting those promises we made. We're about 4 years behind schedule on undergrounding primarily because of the COVID impact on the ability to get transformers and all that type of stuff. I mean, it really set us back and it drove up the cost. What you were paying for transformers are now 3 times that much. So we're, my biggest regret is we're behind schedule. We were supposed to, actually 2026 was when we originally targeted to be completely done, and now we're 2030. So, but of all the failures, that's not too bad.
No, you're moving along. So if Randy Knight, city manager of Winter Park, could have a conference call with Randy Knight 20 years ago, what cautionary tales would you share with younger Randy and say, hey, watch out for this, do this differently? What advice would you give?
It would all be about the early years. I think we could have spent money more wisely in the early
In what
years.
ways?
Uh, I, I think we I think we were putting in Cadillac solutions at a time we probably need to do Chevy solutions. Uh, I mean, ultimately it was okay, but we we spent some in the early years. I think we spent money we didn't have to spend, and I'd like to have had a better handle on that. We
So,
were
like,
slow.
in what capacity? Tell me. And the reason I'm asking is, let's say I'm the city of Vancore, and I'm thinking about doing this, and I want to pick Randy's brain. Is Randy, when you say don't go the gold, go to silver on these types of things, what kind of things are you talking about?
So in our early years, we contracted out all of our maintenance and all of our capital work, and so we had our own utility director that worked for the city. And then there was a director of this private company that was doing all of our maintenance. And I think, and of course, they got paid by what they did. And so I feel like in our early years, and I was in no way an electric expert, they would say, we need to do XYZ. And our director said, okay, do XYZ. And I don't think
Okay,
we,
so maybe a little bit tighter reins on the vendors who are doing these things because you're novice.
right.
They could be taking advantage of you. I was also going to guess what you would have said is roll back the clock like 3 years, Steve, because what we should have done is gotten a better appraisal of some of the dysfunctionality that was already out there. Because when you said you took it over, there was stuff that you hadn't noticed or hadn't identified that ended up
Yeah.
costing you more to get things up and running.
And I would say we knew the system was old. I mean, we could drive down and see that the poles are old. We didn't know. I mean, we didn't, and maybe some of that is what I'm talking about in overspending. We may have more aggressively replaced poles and wires, and they would have lasted another 2 or 3 years. We tried to adopt the approach. We don't want to wait till it falls down to fix it. And
Not a
and there's
bad
some
policy.
wisdom. There's some wisdom to that. But how much of it would have fallen down? I don't know.
Okay, so you came out of so your advice here would be do a better appraisal on the front end, make sure
Yeah,
you fully understand, and then don't come charging out of the gate so quickly.
right.
It's funny. It's a funny thing because we use the expression of the dog catching the car, and right before the dog catches the car, it's all like energy and fire, right? And you guys with that, and you come in and we're gonna do everything with da, and you're saying no, take a knee, slow down,
Right.
act as though you've been here before, that this isn't a brand new shiny toy, and that maybe you overspent on getting things up and running. You could have spread those expenses out. That's good counsel.
Right.
I get it. Get it. Anything else you want to share with folks to say, hey guys, if you're thinking about doing this, here's a lesson we learned, a good takeaway or two that other people can use?
I don't know about a lesson learned, but I will say, and I'm watching this take place in Clearwater and St. Pete now as they're considering municipalizing, and I've watched it in every city that's tried around the country that's tried to municipalize, and that is don't buy the arguments they throw at you. The investor-owned utility, they have a playbook they play, and it's the city's too small. They don't know what they're doing. They used to say we're going to be five guys in a pickup truck trying to restore power, and all of that stuff. It's not. I mean, I don't understand how these electrons move and all that kind of stuff, but it's not rocket science. I mean, you hire people that know how to wire a system, they know how to maintain a system, and they can do it. It's not the big challenge they make it sound like it is. And 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 it's you hate to say it this way, but it's almost a guaranteed rate of return. You mentioned earlier about being a monopoly, and yes, the city's a monopoly, but so are the investor-owned utilities, and they aren't answerable to the people. They're only answerable to their
That's my
stockholders.
exact point. If things start to
Eh,
go poorly, people will start losing their elections
That's
because
right.
trash and power, and probably when
Roads,
you flush, if those things don't work, people understandably, they get really mad and people lose their jobs. I
right.
remember one time, a long time ago, a city manager said more people have lost their jobs over poor trash delivery than all other things combined. And I'm thinking, well, that's because not that many cities have their own public power, because if these things go bad, you're going to be held accountable. And I think
Yeah.
that's also the big difference. And then the money stays in the community, which is so important, right? If, like I said, we have best parks in America. When you guys get through the next 5 years and get all that undergrounding done, like you said, you can lower rates a little bit and maybe split the baby and say, well, lower rates, but we're also going to use this money to rebuild a new downtown library, or widen these roads, or build roundabouts here or there, or whatever those things are. As long as you identify those clear projects, voters usually really get behind them.
Yeah. One final thing
Sure.
that I tell anybody that's looking at doing this, and that is, what is your why? Is your why big enough to get you through the hard times when you're getting sued, when the public's yelling at you for spending money on lawyers, to try to buy the electric system? What is your why? We had a big why in Winter Park. The reliability was bad, and we weren't getting the service we wanted. The trees were getting butchered. Uh, when I've seen some of the cities that have failed around the country, their why didn't carry the day with the majority of their population. Whether it's they're doing it for green energy or, whatever it might be, if their community's not behind that reason, it's hard to get to the finish line, because
I like that.
they will try to replace elected officials in the next election, and they're going to be heavily involved investing in your community for the goodwill. They're going to sponsor every golf tournament, every chamber dinner.
Yeah.
And
Well, and that's where the free market of competition really does come in, because if they're providing reliable power at a reasonable fee, you're not going to get 69%, 70% on the ballot to go borrow a boatload of money. They're going to say,
Right.
no, we're happy. We don't need change. But in your case, people felt strongly. And it's really an interesting perspective, Brandy, because what you're saying was a 1-2 punch, not just the trees and the power outages, but the proximity to a neighboring municipal utility that was like, pardon me, kicking ass and taking names there.
Right.
And you're like, guys, we could do that. And it's hard. It's a hard message to do. And even though you got outspent in the campaign 10-1, and half of your money you couldn't even advocate, it says you started with a very good why and some really strong trade winds at your back.
That's right.
Excellent. Well, Randy, really appreciate you doing this. Before I let you go, tell us one cool thing about your hometown that we don't know about.
Well, it is if you haven't been here, we have a great downtown. We got Rollins College. We've got a scenic boat tour. It's just a fantastic place to visit, and even a better place to live.
Don't forget about Full Sail.
Oh, we got Full Sail right on the border of our community, which is a fantastic university. We got Valencia Community, or State College, I guess it is now. We got great museums. It's a great place to be.
I mentioned Full Sail because I may or may not have a son who graduated valedictorian from Full Sail.
Well, good.
Well, folks, this has been another episode of the Florida Public Powercast. Thank you so much for listening. I want to remind you that this episode was brought to you by the Florida Municipal Electric Association, your statewide voice for public power. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Steve Vancore, and you've been listening to the Florida Public Powercast, sponsored by Burns and McDonald, and brought to you by the Florida Municipal Electric Association, your statewide voice for public power. Thanks for joining us.